We're learning.
Yes.
Okay, do you enjoy this, my sister? What's your name again? I'm sorry?
Gail.
Kale. Gail or Kale?
Gail.
Gail. Are you enjoying this? Is this...
I'm not quite understand. It's the first time for me in the Bible school. I never try to read the Bible book.
We're not, listen, you're not alone. He can tell you how confused I am. I was very confused.
Everybody goes.
But I try and I keep coming and I learn.
You hear what Eric says, Gail? Everybody goes through that just like Fina.
Right.
But eventually stuff starts to stick.
In our way, our time, we will look at them as a bunch of snobs.
Our biblical ancestors in the faith?
Yeah, we will look at them as a bunch of snobs from our time because you have to belong and you have to be like everyone else. And it was all social status.
Yeah, I could see that. You could say that. I wouldn't necessarily say snobs because a lot of these people are peasants, but we would look at them as...
Bunch of dummies.
Yeah, because that's how arrogant Americans look at everybody else. If you're not American, you're a bunch of dummies.
No, I don't mean so.
Right, and by the way, we're 2 minutes to midnight. Actually now, 1 minute. So who's the dummy after a nuclear war? Let's continue.
All of us.
Jews or Judeans? Some of you reading this with us in Bible Alive today might be thinking, why does he say, and the Judeans sent these people, not the Jews? In my Bible, it says Jews. Let's see if we can tackle that. New American Bible Revised Edition, that's your red Bible. If you've been on an Emmaus retreat, you probably got that. That's the Bible translation used by the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. John chapter 1, verse 19. And this is the testimony of John. When the Jews from Jerusalem sent priests and Levites to him to ask him, who are you? The New Revised Standard Version. These are the two best, perhaps, English translations available to the public, or two of the best. New Revised Standard Version, John chapter 1, verse 19. This is the testimony given by John when the Jews sent priests and Levites from Jerusalem. It's basically the same thing, the Jews. New Jerusalem Bible, John chapter 1:19. This was the witness of John when the Jews sent to him priests and Levites from Jerusalem to ask him, who are you? Seeing a pattern here. Let's go back a few hundred years. The King James Version, John 1:19. And this is the record of John when the Jews sent priests and Levites from Jerusalem to ask him, who art thou? The Derives, John chapter 1:19, around the same time as the KJV. And this is the testimony of John when the Jews sent from Jerusalem priests and Levites to him to ask him, who art thou? New International Version, John 1:19. Now this was John's testimony when the Jewish leaders, interesting, in Jerusalem sent priests and Levites to ask him who he was. Folks, your Bible translation, whatever you use, most likely the people in here will probably be using the New American Bible or New American Bible Revised Edition. I want you to pray with that Bible. I want you to read that Bible. I want you to use it to study. I want you to enjoy it. I want you to familiarize yourself with it. Everything great. I want you to pray with it and study with it. Just do me a favor. Don't trust it. Do all those things, just don't trust it. Because as good as those translations are, and they're very good, they got some doozies of anachronistic mistranslations and ethnocentric mistranslations in them. So let's see if we can grapple together about this. In most English translations, John chapter 1 verse 19 is translated, when the Jews sent priests and Levites. That is unfortunate, since meanings derive not of the meanings of words are not derived from dictionaries or lexica or concordances, but from social systems. In this case, the social system of the reader and speaker. And modern readers will think, when John says, when the Jews sent priests and Levites, that John is referring to those persons whom readers today know from their experience to be Jews. People like these people, our brothers and sisters. Look at the screen. People having this wonderful culture, rich heritage, traditions, sacred and secular, beautiful though. Orthodox, conservative, reformed, Okay. The fact is, from a religious point of view, all modern Jews, our Jewish brothers and sisters, belong to traditions developed largely after the time of Jesus and compiled in the Babylonian Talmud, 6th century Common Era. For example, consider the Jewish practice called bar mitzvah, beautiful tradition. Perhaps you have had friends who have had sons who have had a bar mitzvah, show of hands. It's beautiful, right? Have you been there? Have you taken part? It's wonderful. Maybe you have friends from a Reformed congregation whose Seder will have an orange at the Seder, which represents women, maybe taking on a rabbinical role. Scandalous. A Reformed congregation whose daughters had a bat mitzvah. Beautiful. How many people here have been to a bat mitzvah? Oh, wow. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Please understand, and this doesn't make the bar mitzvah legitimate or terrible or anything. It just, the bar mitzvah didn't exist until 500 CE. Shai Cohen expresses that. A Jewish scholar, Shai Cohen, okay? And I can quote from many different scholars, both Jewish and non. The bar mitzvah did not exist until 500 CE. You know what that means? Jesus never had a bar mitzvah. Saul of Tarsus never had a bar mitzvah. Peter, James, John, the 12, John the Dunker, Joseph, etc. never had a bar mitzvah. No bar mitzvah was given to Moses, Samuel, or any of the prophets. And no one in the Bible ever experienced the bar mitzvah. And you say, okay, they were all Jews, but they were Jewish personages who didn't have bar mitzvah. That hadn't evolved yet. No, that's not simple like that. Because I can go through 13 other practices that you would consider and I would consider, or beliefs, essential to modern Jews. To Jews. For example, severe monotheism. It is highly doubtful that the people that I just mentioned could be described as monotheists. Henotheists, worshiping one God, but believing that there only is one God? That's doubtful. But if you talk to any modern Jewish brother or sister, Orthodox, Reformed, most Jewish traditions of anyone that I can conceive of are of a severe monotheism. That just didn't exist like that. Only a very small amount were monotheists in any stretch of the imagination in the first century. Now, and then we could talk about circumcision. Or we could talk about how modern Jewish religion is mostly domestic instead of political religion. We could talk about a whole bunch of things. And that is not at all to knock our Jewish brothers and sisters or to make illegitimate their tradition. It's Abrahamic, along with other branches on the tree. Christianity and its branches, of which Catholicism is a part. So are Protestants and Anglicans and ancient churches of the East and Eastern Orthodox. So would also be another branch, Islam. So the tree has many sister branches. All good, but don't confuse the branch and the leaves with the root of the tree. We make distinctions. So that's religiously. As for their rich ethnic origin, some scholars have argued that DNA evidence suggests that Central European Jews, called Ashkenazi Jews, of which make up 80% of Jews worldwide, have some relationship in origin to Turkic and Iranian ancestors, not only from Palestine, but it's a rich heritage with Slavic influences and influences from the Russian steppe and influences from what is now called Turkey. Ancestors who comprised the Khazar Empire and converted to Judaism in the 8th century CE. That according to the Encyclopedia Britannica and various genetic studies. Of course, I have to say that the Khazar hypothesis has been hotly debated. Hotly debated for several reasons. It is a very unfortunate testimony to both history and the history generally speaking of the world, and history of the church in particular, that there have been only two responses that the world and the church have given concerning, or members of the church have given, and by church I now mean worldwide body of believers, concerning Judaism and the Jewish people. And that is the extreme of anti-Semitism, horrendous bigotry, trying to genocidally wipe out the Jewish people, and Zionism. Jews are the chosen people of God so much that they can do no wrong. They do not have that the state of Israel itself is without any blame at all, no matter what it does in any way, including apartheid situations. And this seems to be the only two ways of addressing the Jewish people as such among vast majorities of the people on earth. And one of the main reasons for that is because of this side, anti-Semitism. The way the Jews have been treated throughout their history has been absolutely horrendous. And it is a blight over Christian history, the Catholic Church in particular. We have to admit to that. We may say that the church is holy, but my friends, I got to tell you, the church, the body of Christ, is holy and is becoming holy. She's made up of sinners. And one of the greatest sins we've ever done is to slanderously say that our Jewish brothers and sisters are responsible for being Christ killers. I'm going to show you how ridiculous that is. There were no Jews in the first century, folks. How could they possibly be responsible for killing Christ? Thus, given the 6th century Common Era origin of all forms of contemporary Jewish religion, and given the United States' experience of Jews based largely on Central European Jews, Ashkenazi, themselves originating in an uncertain and extremely complicated and rich manner, it would be quite anachronistic to identify any modern Jews with the Judeans mentioned in John's Gospel or the rest of the New Testament. I know. When you're at Mass and when you're in the Bible, you hear Jews mentioned in the translation. I get it. I understand. Part of the reason for that is because recently, after the horrors of World War II, the Catholic Church has advanced in a beautiful way interreligious dialogue with our Jewish brothers and sisters. But still we have a kind of holdover of a static view of history. And so you understand these documents that we've issued with our Jewish brothers and sisters, these beautiful interfaith documents condemning anti-Semitism, that's just the first step in dialogue. We need to progress in dialogue and see ourselves as sister faiths out of one Abrahamic tree. But that's going to take time. That's going to take time. In reality, whenever you see the word Jew in the Bible, English Bible, scratch it out and put in Judean, because that's really the proper translation of Judaios or Yehuda, the Greek and Hebrew respectively. Judean, an inhabitant of the region called Judea or Yehud, the area around Jerusalem and its vicinity, or greater Syro-Palestine, that area, which would include Galilee and in the first century, and the Transjordan called Perea in the first century, and the area around the vicinity of Jerusalem in the southwest of the Jordan River, which would be Judea proper. Okay? You should always have Judean, never Jew. And that will save us a lot of the horrors of anti-Semitism and confusion around Easter time. Like when we read John, and again and again and again, it's the Jews, right, that come against Jesus. And it's the Jews that crucify Jesus. No, they don't. They don't crucify Jesus. They had nothing to do with that. You understand? Literally nothing to do with that. Both here and in all of the 69 other instances in the Gospel called John where the term Judeans, Greek Judaioi, appears, there is nothing of the modern connotations of Jew or Jewishness. Hence, it is simply inappropriate to project those modern meanings backward into the period when John was written. Rather, Judean, in Greek Judaios, meant a person belonging to a group called Judeans, Judaioi, situated geographically and forming a territory taking its name from its inhabitants, Judea, Judea, which in the first century looked like what's there southwest of the Jordan River. See that? Precisely. Judeans were a group of people organically related to and rooted in that specific place with its distinctive environs, air, and water. The correlatives of Judean in the gospel called John are Galilean. See Galilee up by the Sea of Galilee, Sea of Tiberias? Do you see it? North, past Samaria. You see where Galilee is? That's where Jesus is from. And Perean, which is, of course, the name given in the first century to the Transjordan. That's east of the Jordan River. You all see Perea? Mm-hmm. Okay. Galilean, Perean, and Judean in the Gospel of John together make up Benim Yisrael, sons of Israel. Those Israelites living in first century Syro-Palestine, which is that whole area, including also Samaria and the Decapolis and Nabatea, Idumea, Phoenicia.
Bethlehem and Jerusalem being part of Judea, that makes Jesus a Judean.
Jesus isn't, no, we're going to get, it's a little tricky. If you were in Israel, Jan, right, if you were an Israelite, you wouldn't call yourself a Judean, you'd call yourself an Israelite. Follow? Mm-hmm. All right. So if I was living in Judea and I hear this guy talking with a Galilean accent, I would distinguish among the sons of Israel Galileans, Pereans, and Judeans. So it's a little slippery, this term. If, however, I belonged to a non-Israelite people or an Israelite emigre living in the Mediterranean world, I would collectively call everybody who lives in Syro-Palestine and follows barbarian Israelite customs, whether they're Galilean, Perean, or Judean, I just call them Judean, which means to me, barbarian Israelite, speaking a barbarian language, Aramaic, following barbarian customs like genital mutilation and dietary customs that I could not possibly follow living in the Mediterranean world. Does that make sense? So throughout the New Testament, try to understand, Judean is used a little differently in each text. In John, it specifically is a divider between Galileans and Pereans. It's an in-house, and that tells you something about the Johannine community, doesn't it? It tells you they're made up of Israelites. And not just Israelites. Israelites who probably originally were very close in this geography. It also tells you something else about them. It tells you that they specifically use Judean as a stand-in word for darkness. So they got problems with Judeans. That's not exactly how Paul is. Paul has a negative feel for Judeans too, but for him, Judeans would be anybody from Syro-Palestine that has a barbarian way of, they're barbarian Israelites. Where Paul services civilized Israelites, Hellene. Yeah. Danny.
Barbarian because they're not educated.
Barbarian because they have not adopted Greco-Roman customs. That's it. Greco-Roman dress, Greco-Roman diet, Greco-Roman... Right? Those are civilized Israelites, wrongly translated as ethnic Greeks. There are no ethnic Greeks in the first century. Yeah, they're the ones who, because of the conquests of Alexander the Great and Hellenization, turning the whole world into Macedonians and Athenians, they're the ones who have assimilated, while still identifying as Israelites. But Israelites back home in Syro-Palestine who did not assimilate, barbarian Israelites, those are called by outsiders whether they're Israelite or not, Judeans. So let's see if we go through the slides, we can see this. The customary ethnocentric opposite of Israel is non-Israel, the nations other than Israel, and simply the nations or Gentiles. Judeans, Galileans, and Pereans make up the barbarian Israelites living in the Roman province of first century Syro-Palestine. First century Israel, of course, is larger still. There were many émigré communities, civilized Israelites, Hellenes, wrongly translated as ethnic Greeks, living as minorities among non-Israelite majorities throughout the Mediterranean world. And here is that Mediterranean world. Note that in Josephus, his work Life, the word Judaios likewise always means Judean and never Jew, same thing as the Bible, and refers to people living in that territory to which it gives its name. Given the prominent role of the Judeans in John's Gospel, usually as opponents of Jesus, this is an important translation correction. It's always Judean rather than Jew. It helps us avoid a boatload of anti-Semitism. The term Judaios, Judean, used either as a substantive or as an adjective, appears 70 times in the fourth gospel called John. It is used only 5 times in Matthew, only 6 times in Mark, and only 5 times in Luke. That tells you something. That tells you something. Look at the huge difference. This striking contrast between John and the Synoptics makes understanding the term Judean critically important. The territorial designation of Judea connoted different territories at different times throughout Israel's history, and the use of it can be very confusing. So let's try to give a rundown on this. We'll start with the Persian Empire. During the period of Persian rule, Yehud, which is the Hebrew for Judea, designated only the small area around Jerusalem, since that is where all Judeans were to be found. The Yehudim, the Judeans, were those inhabitants of the Persian colony called Yehud. Other members of the house of Israel, like the Samaritans, later considered by the Yehudim not to be Israelites, but to be half-breeds, were designated otherwise. Under the Maccabees, now we're moving ahead, in reaction to Hellenizing forces post-Alexander the Great, the term Judea, was used to refer to the larger population the Maccabees controlled, as seen here on this map. This population dwelled both in Jerusalem and in its environs, as well as in Samaria, Galilee, Idumea, the coastal plain except Ashkelon, and much of the Transjordan. Thus, under the Maccabees, the number of Judeans grew appreciably. In the Roman period, the Roman province of Syro-Palestine included the Galilee, Samaria, and Judea, which, along with Perea, the name Josephus, the historian, gives to the Transjordan, included the population controlled by Herod the Great under the title King of Judea. That's what he enjoyed, that title. Of course, Herod the Great died. After his death, his son Archelaus became ethnarch, that's ruler of a people, of an ethne, ruler of a Judea that included only the Jerusalem area, Idumea, and Samaria. He did not rule over directly Galilee or Perea. Those were different sons of Herod the Great that got to rule those areas. Archelaus' rule excluded Galilee and Perea. When Archelaus was removed in the year 6 Common Era, subsequent procurators governed only this same smaller area. Thus, in Jesus' time, Judea, Galilee, and Perea constituted 3 population areas that together made up the house of Israel. On the other hand, other peoples of the Mediterranean called all barbarian members of the house of Israel Judeans, after the region in which their central ingathering place of economics, and worship was located, the temple in Jerusalem, in Judea. In sum, when the terms Judea or Judean get used by the gospel we call John, they should be understood as referring to the persons living in a territory located in the southern and western part of the Roman province of Syro-Palestine. John chapter 1:19. And this is the testimony given by John when the Judeans sent priests and Levites from Jerusalem to ask him, "Who are you?" And that makes sense. John notes correctly that the Judeans sent priests and Levites from Jerusalem. The Passover of the Judeans was near. John chapter 2, 5, 6, 7, and 11 tell us. So Jesus goes up to Jerusalem. The Passover of the Jews? No, the Passover of the Judeans. A discussion arises between the disciples of John the Dunker and a Judean in John chapter 3. Not a Jew. Between the disciples of John the Dunker and a Judean. In chapter 4, we learn that Judeans, not Jews, do not share things in common with Samaritans. Jesus goes about in Galilee where he is safe, but does not go about in Judea because the Judeans were trying to kill him in John chapter 7. Not the Jews were trying to kill him. No Jews were ever trying to kill Jesus. The Judeans were trying to kill him. Somebody at the door? In John chapter 8, there are Judeans who initially believe in Jesus, but after the conversation deteriorates, they decide Jesus is not really one of them. Hence, he has to be a Samaritan. In chapter 10, verse 31, and chapter 11, verse 8, we again learn that Judea is dangerous territory for Jesus. And in chapter 20, following the crucifixion and resurrection, it will be a dangerous place for Jesus' followers as well. Judeans console Mary and Martha after the death of Lazarus, but after raising Lazarus, Jesus can no longer go around openly among Judeans, so he retreats to a region near the wilderness of Judea. At the supper with his disciples, there Jesus washes his disciples' feet. Jesus distinguishes between Judeans and his inner group, not between Jews and his inner group. Jesus is arrested by the Judean police, not the Jews, and in his trial, Pilate asks Jesus if he is king over this people, an area governed by Pilate, namely Judea. Not king of the Jews, king of the Judeans. Jesus then makes it very clear to Pilate that his kingdom has nothing to do with Judean society. Not Jews, Judean society, even though his tormentors taunt him with the mock title, King of the Judeans. The inscription over the cross, Jesus Christ, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Judeans, has in it a wonderful irony that would have rankled Jesus' Judean opponents. It spells out Jesus' identification as Jesus of Nazareth, a Galilean. Jesus the Galilean is being designated king of the Judeans. How insulting. Let's stop there.